started to whisper behind her back, saying that her husband's death had taken away her cooking gift and left her with nothing but shame. The worst part was watching Mama Kioma rise to become the new cooking queen of the village. Every week, Mama Kioma would host big gatherings where she served the most delicious meals that made people lick their fingers and beg for more. The women would praise her and bring her gifts, while the men would tell their wives to learn from Mama Kioma's example. Even the village chief had declared that Mama Kioma's stew was fit for the gods themselves. This praise made Mama Ngozi's heart burn with a jealousy so deep that it kept her awake at night, staring at her ceiling and wondering why life had turned against her so completely. Mama Ngozi tried everything to get her cooking skills back. She went to the church and prayed for hours, she bought expensive spices from the market traders, and she even asked other women to teach her their secrets. But nothing worked. Every pot of stew she made tasted like disappointment, and every plate of rice she cooked came out either too hard or too soft. Her only daughter, Adise, had stopped eating her food and started going to Mama Kioma's house for meals, claiming that she couldn't stand the taste of failure anymore. The shame was so heavy that Mama Ngozi stopped attending village meetings and started staying inside her compound, hiding from the eyes that looked at her with pity. One particularly difficult evening, as Mama Ngozi was sitting alone in her dark kitchen crying into her wrapper, she heard a gentle knock on her wooden gate. She wiped her tears quickly and went to see who would visit her at such a late hour, when most people were already inside their homes. Standing at the gate was an old woman she had never seen before in the village. The stranger was very short and bent over, wearing layers of old, faded cloth that looked like they had been sewn together from different pieces of fabric. Her skin was wrinkled like dried fruit, and her eyes were cloudy and grey, as if she could barely see the world in front of her. But there was something about the way she smiled that made Mama Ngozi feel both comfortable and very uneasy at the same time. "Good evening, my daughter," the old woman said in a voice that sounded like dry leaves rubbing against each other. "I have been travelling for many days, and I am very tired and hungry. Can you spare some food and water for an old traveller?" Mama Ngozi felt embarrassed because she knew her food was terrible, but she could not turn away someone who was asking for help. That would be a very bad thing in the eyes of the ancestors. She invited the old woman inside and served her a bowl of the watery stew with some hard gari that she had prepared earlier. She expected the woman to complain or make a face, but instead, the stranger ate every single drop and even licked the bowl clean with her fingers. After the meal, the old woman looked at Mama Ngozi with those cloudy grey eyes and said something that made the widow's heart skip several beats. "You are suffering because your gift has been stolen from you, my daughter. I can see it clearly on your face and in your spirit. Someone has taken what belonged to you and is using it to shine while you sit in darkness." Mama Ngozi felt tears rushing to her eyes because this stranger had spoken the exact truth that she had been feeling deep in her soul. She asked the old woman how she knew this, and the stranger just smiled that uncomfortable smile again. "I'm not just an ordinary traveller," the old woman whispered, moving closer so that Mama Ngozi could smell the strange mixture of herbs and smoke on her breath. "I am someone who understands the ways of the world that most people choose to ignore. I know about cooking gifts and how they can be moved from one person to another through spiritual means. Your neighbour did not become a great cook by accident or hard work alone. She visited someone in the forest who helped her steal your gift while you were weak from grief." The words hit Mama Ngozi like a bucket of cold water, and suddenly everything made sense in a very dark and terrible way. The old woman reached into her layers of cloth and brought out a small leather pouch that was tied with a red string. She placed it on the ground between them and told Mama Ngozi to look inside very carefully. With shaking hands, the widow opened the pouch and saw what looked like dried red powder that sparkled slightly in the dim lamplight. The powder had a smell that was both sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers that had been left in the sun for too long. "This is called Yuda Miri," the old woman explained. "It is a very special spice that comes from the deepest parts of the forest where ordinary people never go. It is not just a cooking ingredient. It is a spiritual key that will open the doors to success that have been locked against you." Mama Ngozi stared at the red powder, feeling her heart beat faster and faster in her chest. She asked the old woman what exactly the powder would do if she used it in her cooking. The stranger's smile grew wider, showing teeth that were stained dark yellow. "When you add just one small pinch of this spice to your stew, people will not be able to resist eating it. They will crave your food like a madman craves water in the desert. Your name will be on every tongue in this village and beyond. You will become greater than Mama Kioma, greater than anyone who has ever cooked in this land. But you must use it wisely and never tell anyone your secret, or the power will turn against you. The widow knew deep in her spirit that this was not a normal gift. There was something very wrong about the way the powder sparkled, and the way the old woman's eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. But the pain of being mocked and ignored for 5 long years was too much to bear anymore. She thought about her daughter eating at Mama Kioma's table. She thought about the women laughing at her watery stew, and she thought about the chief praising her enemy while she suffered in silence. The jealousy and desperation in her heart made her reach out and take the pouch from the ground, even though her hands were trembling with fear and doubt. "What must I give you in exchange for this powder?" Mama Ngozi asked, because she knew that nothing in this world came for free, especially things that involved spiritual power. The old woman waved her wrinkled hand in the air dismissively and said that she did not need money or material things. "All I ask is that you remember me in your prayers when you become successful, and that you never question where the powder came from or how it works. Some doors are better left closed, my daughter. Just use it and enjoy the fruits of your labor." With those final words, the old woman stood up slowly, adjusted her layers of cloth, and walked out of the compound, disappearing into the thick darkness of the night like smoke in the wind. Mama Ngozi sat alone with the leather pouch in her hands for the rest of the night, turning it over and over as she debated what to do. The morning sun was already rising when she finally made her decision. She would use the powder just once to prove to everyone that she was not a useless widow who had lost her cooking gift. After that one success, she would throw the rest of the powder away and rely on her own skills. She convinced herself that one small pinch could not possibly cause any real harm to anyone. It was just a spice after all, even if it came from a mysterious source. With her mind finally made up, she hid the pouch inside a clay pot at the back of her kitchen, where no one would ever think to look. The very next day was a big village meeting where everyone was expected to bring food to share. Mama Ngozi had been planning to skip the meeting as usual to avoid the shame of people rejecting her food. But now, with the powder hidden in her kitchen, she felt a strange new confidence flowing through her veins. She went to the market early in the morning and bought the best ingredients she could afford: fresh tomatoes, onions, red peppers, and a good piece of beef that still had some fat on it. She also bought stockfish and crayfish to make the stew even more delicious and impressive. The market women looked at her with surprise because they had not seen her buy quality ingredients in a very long time. When she got back home, Mama Ngozi locked her kitchen door and started the cooking process with more care and attention than she had given to anything in years. She fried the peppers and onions until they were perfectly golden. She seasoned the meat with all the traditional spices, and she let everything simmer slowly on the fire until the whole compound smelled like a 5-star restaurant. The stew was looking and smelling absolutely perfect, better than anything she had cooked since her husband's death. But she knew it was not complete yet. With her heart pounding in her chest like a talking drum, she reached for the leather pouch and opened it carefully. The red powder seemed to shimmer and dance in the morning light, almost as if it was alive and waiting to be used. Mama Ngozi's hand hesitated for a moment as a small voice in her head told her to stop and throw the powder away. But the memory of Mama Kioma's success and the village chief's praise pushed the doubt aside. She took a tiny pinch of the Yuda Miri between her thumb and finger, so small that it was barely visible, and dropped it into the bubbling pot of stew. The moment the powder touched the hot liquid, something very strange happened that made her step back in shock. The entire pot began to glow with a faint red light that lasted for only a few seconds before fading away completely. The smell of the stew changed instantly, becoming so rich and intoxicating that it made Mama Ngozi's mouth water uncontrollably. It was not just the smell of good food anymore. It was something deeper and more primal, like the smell was reaching into her brain and triggering every hunger sensation she had ever felt in her entire life. She tasted a small spoonful and almost fell to her knees because the flavor was beyond anything she had ever experienced. It was as if every delicious meal she had ever eaten in her life had been combined into one single perfect taste. Mama Ngozi packed the stew into her best serving bowl and covered it with a clean cloth. She dressed herself in her finest wrapper and head tie, painted her lips with dark red lipstick, and walked to the village square with her head held high for the first time in years. When she arrived at the meeting, the other women were already sitting under the big tree, arranging their various pots and dishes on long wooden tables. Mama Kioma was there too, standing in the center like a queen, showing off her own large pot of stew to the admiring crowd. When people saw Mama Ngozi approaching with her bowl, Some of them started to whisper and giggle, expecting another tasteless disaster. But as soon as Mama Ngozi removed the cloth from her bowl, everything changed in a way that no one could have predicted. The smell that came out of that bowl was so powerful and overwhelming that it stopped all conversation immediately. Every single person in the square turned their heads toward the smell like flowers following the sun. Their eyes became wide and glassy, and their mouths started to water so much that some people actually began to drool without realizing it. The chief, who was sitting on his carved wooden throne, stood up suddenly and walked toward Mama Ngozi's bowl like a man in a trance, completely forgetting about the speech he was supposed to give. The effect was immediate and shocking. People began to push and shove each other, fighting to get closer to Mama Ngozi's bowl of stew. They were no longer acting like civilized adults, but more like hungry animals who had not eaten in weeks. The village chief grabbed a spoon and took the first taste, and his reaction made everyone even more desperate. His eyes rolled back in his head, his knees buckled, and he made a deep moaning sound that was almost embarrassing to witness. "This is the food of the gods," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is what heaven must taste like." Within minutes, the entire pot was empty. People were licking their fingers, licking the spoons, and some were even trying to scrape the bottom of the bowl to get the last remaining drops. They begged Mama Ngozi for more, offering her money, jewelry, and promises of favor if she would just give them another taste. But there was no more stew left, and the crowd looked at her with such desperate and hungry eyes that she felt both proud and slightly disturbed by what she had created. Mama Kioma stood in the corner, her own pot of stew completely ignored and untouched, watching Mama Ngozi's triumph with a face full of shock and jealousy that tasted like bitter leaves. From that day forward, Mama Ngozi's life changed completely and dramatically. People started coming to her house every single day, begging and pleading for her to cook for them. They brought gifts of money, yams, chickens, and expensive cloth, placing them at her feet like she was some kind of shrine. The village chief declared that from now on, only Mama Ngozi would be allowed to cook for all important ceremonies and celebrations. Her daughter Adiz came back home with tears of joy, apologizing for ever doubting her mother's abilities. Even Mama Kioma came one evening, her pride completely broken, asking Mama Ngozi to teach her the secret of making such incredible stew. But Mama Ngozi kept her promise to the old woman and never revealed the source of her success. She told everyone that she had simply rediscovered her cooking gift through prayer and meditation, and that hard work was the only secret anyone needed to know. In her heart, she felt some guilt about using the powder, but the success was too sweet and too satisfying to give up. She convinced herself that she was not hurting anyone, just giving them delicious food that made them happy. So she continued to use the Yuda Miri powder, adding tiny pinches to her stew every time she cooked, watching as more and more people became obsessed with her food. The demand for her cooking grew so large that Mama Ngozi had to start preparing food every single day just to keep up with the orders. Her small kitchen became like a busy restaurant, with people waiting in long lines outside her gate from morning until night. She hired 2 young girls from the village to help her with the chopping and washing, but she always made sure to add the secret powder herself when no one was watching. The money started flowing into her hands like a river during the rainy season, and she was able to build a bigger kitchen, buy new pots and expensive cooking equipment, and even start wearing gold jewelry that made other women green with envy. However, something very strange started happening in the village that no one could explain at first. It began about 3 weeks after Mama Ngozi had started using the powder regularly. The first person to show signs of the problem was Chief Okonkwo himself. During a village council meeting, the chief suddenly stood up in the middle of someone's speech and announced that he needed to go eat Mama Ngozi's stew immediately because the craving was too strong to ignore. The other elders laughed at first, thinking he was making a joke, but the chief's face was completely serious and even slightly disturbed. He left the meeting and walked straight to Mama Ngozi's compound, not returning until several hours later. After that incident, more people started behaving in similarly strange ways. A farmer named Oak was seen leaving his yam farm in the middle of harvest season because he said the need for Mama Ngozi's stew was stronger than his need to work. A nursing mother named Adana left her crying baby at home and walked 2 miles to Mama Ngozi's house in the hot afternoon sun, ignoring her child's screams. The village school teacher stopped teaching his students in the middle of a lesson and ran out of the classroom, heading straight toward the smell of Mama Ngozi's cooking. It was as if the entire village was under some kind of spell that made them forget about everything else except the taste of that stew. The symptoms grew worse with each passing day. People who had eaten Mama Ngozi's food began to lose interest in other meals completely. They would sit at their own dinner tables, staring at regular food with disgust and disappointment, pushing their plates away like the food was rotten garbage. Mothers stopped cooking for their families because their children would refuse to eat anything that didn't come from Mama Ngozi's kitchen. Husbands started spending all their money on Mama Ngozi's stew instead of buying food for their homes. The local food sellers in the market began to suffer because no one wanted to buy from them anymore. Everyone's taste buds had been hijacked by the red powder, and normal food tasted like dust in their mouths. Then the madness truly began to manifest in ways that scared the entire village. A respected elder named Papa Ndubisi was found at midnight, standing outside Mama Ngozi's locked gate, scratching at the wood with his bare hands until his fingers bled. He was muttering about needing the stew, repeating the same words over and over like a broken record. When his family tried to take him home, he fought them with a strength that should not have been possible for a man his age, screaming that they were trying to kill him by keeping him away from the food. It took 5 strong men to drag him back to his house, where they had to tie him to his bed with thick ropes because he kept trying to escape. More cases of food madness started appearing like an epidemic spreading through the village. A young woman named China was discovered digging through Mama Ngozi's trash heap at dawn, looking for any scraps or leftovers that might have been thrown away. Her wrapper was dirty and torn, her hair was wild and uncombed, and she had lost so much weight that her bones were showing through her skin like a skeleton. When people asked her what she was doing, she looked up at them with eyes that were completely empty of reason, and said she would rather die than go another day without tasting Mama Ngozi's stew. Her own mother wept at the sight of her daughter, reduced to such a shameful and desperate state. The village market, which had always been a place of loud bargaining and joyful commerce, became strangely quiet and depressing. People wandered around the stalls like ghosts, their eyes vacant and unfocused, not interested in buying anything except what they needed to trade for Mama Ngozi's food. Arguments and fights broke out constantly as people competed and battled for spots in the long line outside her compound. Some people started sleeping there overnight, just to guarantee they would be first when she opened her gate in the morning. The atmosphere in Yuman's village had shifted from normal community life to something that felt like a dark and twisted worship of food. Children stopped playing their usual games in the streets. Instead, they sat listlessly by their houses, complaining about hunger even when they had just eaten other food. They cried for Mama Ngozi's stew the way Barbies cry for their mother's breast milk, becoming inconsolable and sick when they couldn't have it. Young men who used to work hard in the farms became lazy and unmotivated, spending their days sitting under trees and talking endlessly about the taste and smell of the stew, comparing notes like drug addicts discussing their favorite intoxicant. The whole social fabric of the village was coming apart at the seams, unraveling faster than anyone could repair it. Mama Ngozi watched all of this happening around her with growing concern and fear, but the money and praise kept flowing in, making it very difficult for her to stop. She tried convincing herself that the people were just overreacting and that their behavior would normalize once the excitement died down. But deep in her spirit, she knew something was terribly wrong. The powder was not just making delicious food. It was creating an unnatural addiction that was destroying people's will and turning them into mindless slaves of their taste buds. Every night, she would lie in her bed, listening to the sounds of people crying and begging outside her gate even in the darkness, and she would feel a cold fear creeping up her spine. The village elders finally called an emergency meeting to discuss the strange sickness that had taken over their community. The meeting was held under the big Iroko tree, where all important decisions were traditionally made, but this time many of the elders themselves were showing signs of the madness. Some kept fidgeting and looking toward Mama Ngozi's compound during the discussion, their attention constantly drifting away from the serious matters at hand. One elder suggested that they should go to a powerful dibia in the neighboring town to consult about what was happening. Another elder said they should call in the pastor from the big church to come and pray against whatever evil spirit had invaded their village. But before any decision could be reached, a terrible incident occurred that changed everything forever. A young man named Emeka, who had been one of the strongest and most handsome boys in the village, completely lost his mind in the middle of the marketplace. He had been standing in line at Mama Ngozi's compound when she announced that she had run out of food for the day and everyone should come back tomorrow. Emeka's reaction was violent and frightening. He began to scream and tear at his own clothes, his eyes rolling back in his head until only the whites were showing. He started speaking in strange voices that did not sound human, saying things that made no sense about needing the food or else he would die a painful death. Then Emeka did something that made everyone watching freeze in absolute horror. He picked up a large stone from the ground, and while still screaming about needing the stew, he brought the stone down on his own head with tremendous force. The sound of his skull cracking was like a coconut breaking, echoing across the shocked silence of the market. Blood poured down his face in thick, dark streams, but he kept hitting himself again and again, shouting that the pain was better than the craving, that death was better than this torture. People rushed to stop him, wresting the stone from his hands, but the damage was already done. Emeka collapsed on the ground, his body twitching and convulsing, his mouth foaming with a mixture of blood and saliva. The village went into immediate panic. Women were crying and wailing, men were running in circles not knowing what to do, and children were screaming in terror at the sight of Emeka's broken body. He was carried to the local clinic, but the nurse there was not equipped to handle such severe head trauma. By the time arrangements were made to transport him to the hospital in the nearby town, Emeka had stopped breathing. His death sent a shock wave through the entire village that was more powerful than thunder. The truth could no longer be denied or ignored. Mama Ngozi's food was not a blessing. It was a curse that had turned their community into a place of madness and death. That same evening, as news of Emeka's death spread through every compound, something even more disturbing began to happen. The people who had been eating Mama Ngozi's stew regularly started experiencing physical symptoms that went beyond just craving. Some developed terrible rashes on their skin that itched so badly they scratched themselves until they bled. Others began to see strange visions and hallucinations of food chasing them through their dreams, and even in their waking hours. A few people reported that they could smell Mama Ngozi's stew everywhere they went, even when they were standing in places where there was no food at all. It was as if the powder had infected not just their taste buds, but their entire minds and bodies. One woman named Obiagely woke up in the middle of the night to find herself standing in her kitchen with a pot of raw meat in her hands, having no memory of how she got there or what she was planning to do. Another man named Uchina was found by his wife trying to eat a bowl of red sand from the ground, claiming that his mind was telling him it was Mama Ngozi's stew. The village was descending into a nightmare that seemed to have no end, and people started to look at Mama Ngozi not with admiration, but with growing suspicion and anger. They began asking questions that she could not answer without revealing her terrible secret. The pastor from the village church, Pastor Ezekiel, decided it was time to take spiritual action. He called for a 3-day fasting and prayer session, inviting everyone in the village to come and seek God's intervention in their crisis. During the prayer session, several people fell into trances and began to speak in prophetic voices, revealing that the source of the madness was spiritual wickedness operating through food. One old prophetess stood up in the middle of the church and pointed directly at Mama Ngozi, who had reluctantly attended the service, saying, "The food you eat is not food. It is death mixed with powder from the kingdom of darkness. Repent before it consumes you all." Mama Ngozi felt her blood run cold as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at her with accusation and horror. She tried to defend herself, denying any knowledge of what the prophetess was talking about, but her voice came out weak and shaky. The guilt that she had been suppressing for weeks suddenly rose up in her throat like bile, threatening to spill out in the form of a full confession. But her pride and fear of consequences held her tongue, and she simply stood up and walked out of the church, feeling the weight of every stare burning into her back like hot coals. She knew that the truth was coming for her, and there was nowhere left to hide. That night, Mama Ngozi sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the leather pouch that had brought her so much success and so much destruction. She had used almost all of the powder, with only a small amount remaining at the bottom of the pouch. She thought about throwing it away or burning it, but something stopped her. Maybe it was greed, maybe it was fear of losing her status, or maybe the powder itself had some kind of hold on her that she didn't fully understand. She fell asleep right there on the kitchen floor, the pouch clutched in her hands, dreaming disturbing dreams of the old woman's cloudy grey eyes watching her from the darkness. She was awakened at dawn by loud pounding on her gate. A crowd of villagers had gathered, led by the family of Emeka who had died trying to stop his craving. They were not there to buy food. They were there for answers and justice. Mama Ngozi's daughter Adiz was crying, begging the crowd to leave her mother alone, but the people's grief and anger had turned into something that could not be easily calmed. They demanded that Mama Ngozi come out and explain what she had done to their food, to their minds, and to their community. They wanted to know why a young man had died, and why their village had turned into a place of suffering and madness. Mama Ngozi came to her gate with tears streaming down her face, and in that moment of overwhelming guilt and fear, she finally told the truth. She confessed everything, about the mysterious old woman, about the red powder called Yuda Miri, about how she had used it because of jealousy and the desire to be better than Mama Kioma. She admitted that she knew something was wrong, but continued using the powder anyway, because she was addicted to the praise and money. As she spoke, she pulled out the leather pouch and showed it to the shocked crowd, and several people actually stepped backward in fear, as if the pouch itself was a dangerous animal. An old dibia who had been called to the village arrived just as Mama Ngozi finished her confession. He was a very respected spiritual practitioner known for his wisdom and power in dealing with both good and evil forces. He looked at the leather pouch with ancient eyes and immediately recognized what it was. "This is not just any spice," he said in a voice that commanded respect and silence. "This is Yuda Miri Arjo, the cursed water spice. It is made from herbs that grow in the burial grounds of people who died from obsession and madness. It is mixed with the ash of rituals meant to control human will and desire. Whoever gave you this powder did not give you a gift. They gave you a weapon to destroy your own community." The dibia explained that the powder was designed to create unbreakable addiction and gradually drive people insane through overstimulation of their desire centers in the brain. Every time someone ate food mixed with Yuda Miri Arjo, a spiritual hook was placed in their soul, tying them to the source of the food like a fish tied to a line. The more they ate, the deeper the hook went, until they had no free will left and would do anything, including harm themselves, to satisfy the craving. The death of Emeka was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of the spiritual corruption that the powder introduced into his system. The dibia took the leather pouch from Mama Ngozi's trembling hands and immediately began to perform a cleansing ritual right there in front of her compound. He built a small fire and threw various herbs and roots into the flames, while chanting in the old language that most villagers no longer understood. He placed the pouch in the fire, and as it burned, the smoke that rose up was black and thick, carrying a smell so foul that people covered their noses and stepped back. Within the smoke, some people swore they could see shapes moving, twisted faces and reaching hands, as if something was trying to escape from the flames. The dibia continued his chanting until the pouch was completely consumed and nothing remained but grey ash. But destroying the source of the powder was not enough to heal what had been done. The dibia explained that everyone who had eaten Mama Ngozi's stew would need to undergo spiritual cleansing to break the addiction and remove the hooks from their souls. This would require a communal fasting period, ritual baths with specific herbs, and prayers from both the church and the traditional priests working together. It would take months of careful spiritual work to restore the village to normal. Some people, especially those who had eaten the food many times, might never fully recover and would have to live with lingering cravings for the rest of their lives. As for Mama Ngozi herself, the punishment was left to the village council to decide. Some people called for her to be banished from Yuman's village forever, sent away as an outcast for bringing such evil into their community. Others wanted her to be locked up or even physically punished for causing Emeka's death and destroying the peace of their home. But the dibia spoke up with wisdom that made everyone pause and think. He said that Mama Ngozi was also a victim of her own jealousy, desperation, and the manipulation of forces she did not fully understand. He suggested that instead of banishment or violence, she should be required to serve the community by helping with the cleansing rituals and personally apologizing to every family that had been affected by her actions. The village chief, who had partially regained his mental clarity after the dibia's preliminary cleansing, agreed with this judgment. Mama Ngozi was stripped of all the wealth and status she had gained through the cursed food. All the money she had earned was to be used to fund the healing ceremonies and to support Emeka's family. She was forbidden from ever cooking food for public consumption again, and she would have to live under the watchful eyes of the elders for the rest of her days in the village. Her daughter Adiz, though heartbroken and ashamed, chose to stay by her mother's side through the punishment, showing a loyalty and love that brought some people to tears. The cleansing process was long and painful for everyone involved. The Dibia, along with Pastor Ezekiel and other spiritual leaders, worked together to create a comprehensive program to heal the village. People had to fast from all food for 3 days, drinking only specially prepared herbal water that tasted bitter and made them vomit frequently as their bodies expelled the spiritual poison. They underwent ritual washing in the stream at dawn every morning for 2 weeks, submerging themselves in water mixed with specific leaves while prayers were spoken over them. Many people cried and screamed during these sessions as the spiritual hooks were pulled from their souls, experiencing pain that was both physical and spiritual in nature. During the healing period, some disturbing truths about the mysterious old woman were revealed. The Dibia did some investigation and discovered that an old woman matching that description had been seen in several different villages over the years, always appearing when someone was at their lowest point and most vulnerable to temptation. She would offer solutions that seemed harmless at first, but always carried hidden consequences that destroyed communities from within. Some elders believed she was not a human being at all, but rather a spiritual agent sent to test people's hearts and expose the darkness that jealousy and greed could bring. Mama Kioma, the original source of Mama Ngozi's jealousy, came forward during the healing period with her own confession. She admitted that years ago, she too had struggled with her cooking and had gone to a different herbalist for help. However, when she learned what was required, using questionable spiritual means, she had refused and walked away, choosing instead to improve through practice and learning from older cooks in other villages. Her success had been genuine and earned through honest hard work, which made Mama Ngozi's jealousy even more tragic. If Mama Ngozi had simply asked for help or been patient with her own process, she could have achieved real success without destroying herself and her community. The story of Mama Ngozi and the cursed stew spread throughout the entire region, becoming a powerful cautionary tale told in every village, town, and city. Parents used it to teach their children about the dangers of jealousy and taking shortcuts to success. Churches and traditional priests alike referenced the story in their teachings about spiritual wisdom and discernment. Market women would point to the tale when warning each other about mysterious traders offering miracle ingredients. Even government officials and educated people, who normally dismissed village stories as superstition, found themselves thinking deeply about the moral lessons embedded in the tragic events. 3 months after the cleansing rituals were completed, life in Newman's village slowly began to return to something resembling normal. People could eat regular food again without feeling disgust or intense cravings, though some admitted they still occasionally dreamed about Mama Ngozi's stew and woke up feeling a ghost of the old hunger. Children started playing in the streets again, farmers returned to their fields with renewed focus, and the market regained its lively atmosphere. The physical healing was largely complete, but the psychological scars would take much longer to fade. Mama Ngozi lived the rest of her days in quiet humility, speaking to anyone who would listen about the terrible mistakes she had made and warning them against letting jealousy control their decisions. She went back to cooking for just herself and her daughter, accepting that her food would never again be special or praised. Sometimes, late at night, she would stand at her window and look toward Mama Kioma's compound, where laughter and cooking smells still floated on the breeze, and she would feel a deep regret for the years she wasted being bitter instead of being grateful. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true success cannot be stolen or manufactured through dark means. It must be earned through patience, honest work, and the courage to accept that sometimes others will shine brighter than you, and that is simply the way life unfolds. The village elder who was the most affected by the madness, Papa Ndubuisi, who had been found scratching at Mama Ngozi's gate until his fingers bled, eventually recovered enough to speak about his experience. He described the addiction as feeling like something was living inside his mind, a hungry creature that screamed for the stew day and night, drowning out all other thoughts and feelings. He said that during the worst moments he would have traded anything, his farm, his family, even his own life, for just one more bowl of that cursed food. His testimony made many people weep and realize just how close they had all come to complete destruction. As the years passed and new generations grew up in Newman's village, the story became a legend told during moonlight gatherings and at community ceremonies. The elders would gather the young people and tell them about the time when a widow's jealousy almost destroyed their entire village, when food became poison for the soul, and when a mysterious old woman tested the hearts of the people and found them wanting. They would emphasize the key lessons. Never accept gifts from strangers without understanding their true cost. Never let jealousy drive you to dark decisions, and always remember that shortcuts to success are usually detours to disaster. The spot where the leather pouch had been burned became a small shrine maintained by the village as a reminder of what had happened. People would bring their children there and tell them the full story, making sure that each new generation understood the dangers of spiritual corruption and the importance of contentment. The Dibia who had saved the village was honored until his death, and his wisdom about balance between traditional and modern spiritual practices became a guiding principle for how the community handled problems. Mama Ngozi eventually passed away in her sleep, years after the incident, having spent the remainder of her life trying to make amends and warn others about the path she had taken. At her funeral, the village gave her a proper burial despite her mistakes, recognizing that she had been both perpetrator and victim in a spiritual battle that was larger than any one person. Her daughter Adiz spoke at the ceremony, telling everyone that her mother's final words were a warning. The sweetest poison is the one that tastes like success. Many people wipe tears from their eyes, not just mourning a death, but also remembering the innocence their village had lost during those dark months. In the end, the story of the secret ingredient that drove the village mad became more than just a tale of horror and moral failure. It became a deep meditation on the human condition, on our desperate need for approval and success, on the ease with which jealousy can corrupt even good people, on the mysterious spiritual forces that operate beneath the surface of everyday life, and on the incredible power of community to heal even the deepest wounds when people work together with honesty and humility. The lesson was carved into the wood of the village meeting hall for all future generations to read. Not all spices season the pot. Some spices season the soul with bitterness. Let contentment be your secret ingredient, and let patience be your cooking fire. For food that nourishes the body without poisoning the spirit is the only meal worth serving. And in that wisdom, Yuman's village finally found the peace that had been stolen by one woman's jealousy and one old woman's dark gift, proving that even the deepest spiritual corruption can be cleansed when a community faces truth with courage and embraces healing with unity.